welcome to episode 22 of The Green Room. I don't know if it was supposed to be me doing that or you, but I've just gone for it.
I think you've done very well there.
Well, thank you. How are you, Nick?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah?
Well, yeah.
First time in shorts?
First time in shorts you've ever seen me, yeah. We're just making off-camera comments about that.
I've worked with Nick for 15 years, and I honestly have never seen you in a pair of shorts. You wear shorts more, you look good.
Thank you. That's 22, two little ducks, you know, if you're a bingo fan.
Yes,
you know
I'm not actually. I'm not, but good, excellent.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying the hot weather?
I am very. So I've got my bottle of water, staying hydrated.
It is very hot today.
Yes.
Could be the hottest day on record.
Could be. It's 30.1 degrees.
Anyway, fortunately, we do not have air conditioning in this room.
Yes.
So we will just, for the next 40 minutes, sweat. Episode 22.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do? Two small ducks? What was
Two little ducks.
Two little ducks.
Yep.
What are we talking about today?
It's all about problems with renewable energy. Problems, not solutions, problems. Sometimes there's problems with renewable energy because people don't like it. But also, they have kind of inherent issues with it, with intermittency. So we're going to talk about a lot of those factors and then hopefully flip the conversation and say, how they're useful. But we're going to focus about the bad stuff because normally in the media and stuff like that, you get the positive aspects of them.
Do you?
Yes.
I don't.
Especially now.
Not the media I read.
We've had the emergency climate, or the call for an emergency climate summit.
Mm-hmm.
We've had that 14, 16-year-old girl, Harry, who's refusing to fly.
Greta.
Swedish girl, wasn't it? So she's making the whole point about, and it's not about renewable energy, but it's kind of like, she's used trains and
to get around all the countries,
but not the planes, and
other
modes of transport.
Presumably she's not going to go to the US and have many talks.
Not anytime soon, yeah.
45-day ferry trip or something.
Yes.
Perfect. Good.
But so it's been kind of climate news, and the alternative energy sources have been at the forefront of the media. So I think very much things have changed. However, it's important with all the positivity to talk about the problems.
Okay, so fundamental problem with renewable energy.
Before we do that, James.
Okay, yes, Nicholas.
The most important thing of this videocast is and podcast.
Is this the most important thing?
Yes, it is. How can people find out about us? How can they listen?
If you would like to watch us, you go onto YouTube. And you can see us chatting away. We've moved around the room a little bit, but still, it's us.
Still trying to get used to it, but
exactly. Harry has thus far refused to come on camera. Eventually,
I like the air of mystery.
Okay. And if you would like to listen to us, so you don't need to see these beautiful faces, you can go onto our website. This is the easiest way that you listen to us, isn't it? You go onto our website, and at the top it says our podcast. And there you will find numerous ways in which you can listen to us. iTunes, Podbean, can be some more. Spotify.
Stitcher.
Did I say TuneIn Radio? I said that.
Well done.
Stitcher.
Yeah.
And so all these ways you can actually just so basically it's your favourite podcast.
It's for me. It's
player?
I always
Are they
get
called podcast players.
I think most people use the apps these days.
Okay, use your favourite app.
But I just it's all
you'll be able to
acronyms
find
to me.
us.
The easiest for me is just the Green Age website. That's what I spent all my time navigating and.
You do. You spend. Yes, good. But that is how you can listen to us. And it is well worth a listen. We've been doing this now for about 6 months. And I think I want to say we're growing better, but maybe we're not. I think we are.
Let's see how this one goes.
Subscriber numbers would suggest we are getting better.
And what I sort of said before, it's depending upon so while some of the episodes are say fact heavy and we might focus on a technology or that sort of aspect, we do also like to give an opinion, which is an important thing to say.
Oh, yeah,
so
absolutely.
if you don't agree with some of our opinions, make your voice heard.
Then you're probably wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, let's kick off.
Yeah.
because I've been talking rubbish for 5 minutes. The problem with the renewable energy. What is the number one problem, Nicholas, with renewable energy?
Intermittency.
Intermittency. So intermittency is essentially the fact that these renewable energy sources, i.e. let's just do wind and solar because they're the
It's
easiest.
not going to be today, is it? Why is it not going to be a problem today? For one of those
Because it's
sources?
so hot. But it's not really sunny, it's just incredibly hot.
Well, it was sunnier earlier, wasn't it?
Anyway, let's go back to intermittency.
Yeah.
So that is basically when the thing that powers the technology is not available, i.e. if it's not windy or if it's not sunny, you get no power, right? So fundamentally, in our grid, in our electric grid, there is always a demand for some electricity,
Yeah.
right? So even if it's really hot today, you might have the AC units on, people have lights on, computers running, etc., etc. You need electricity. If the sun isn't shining, and so maybe at night, or the wind isn't blowing, these renewables will not help. with
Basically, a still day in the winter is shit.
Ooh.
Sorry, excuse me. It's for those two current sources. You'd be really surprised. I tell you what, yesterday I saw my first AD plant.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay, tell me about it.
So I went to see Kingspan. So Kingspan are a manufacturer of insulation materials, amongst other things.
They sponsor the cricket
They sponsor the cricket, yeah, and
and the golf.
Very good knowledge. So I went so they're sort of out in the middle of nowhere, so between kind of the borders of Wales and England, and they've got this massive site where they produce many wonderful different things. But amongst those things, what I was taken around the tour of the factory is they inherited this anaerobic digestion plant, which there's a lot of pork farmers locally. So I'm not going to kind of go into too much detail, but you can see it's kind of recycling all that waste.
That's great.
The byproduct.
Turn into power or heat.
They've got generating turbines,
Blimey.
and so there's waste heat and there's electricity generation as
Well,
well.
that's good. And they looked after you at Kingspan?
Oh yeah, very
Good.
But I was most excited about the anaerobic digestion plant. Actually,
Yes.
it's fascinating. Wasn't so much about the smell. It does actually smell.
Yeah, I imagine it would do. The solar, when you were saying that today we won't have a problem, it is very hot. But what happens to the efficiency of solar panels when it gets hot?
Yes, so it's not quite like a linear relationship, but it's diminishing marginal returns. The hotter it gets,
The less it produces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your perfect day is a winter's day, except obviously the days are shorter. But that's still...
Well, perfect day would be sort of 19 degrees in June, wouldn't it? Sunny.
In terms of length of day, yeah.
And then a windy.
Yeah, keeping the panels cool.
Yeah.
But no, I think so the fundamental issue with renewables, and we're going to look at each of the different sort of technologies, I guess, and talk about it. But the main issue is this intermittency thing. So with nuclear power, with coal, with gas, the benefit of all of those, I'm not saying they're all great, and some of them certainly aren't clean. However, when you need the electricity, you can turn a switch and you're producing it, regardless of time or environmental conditions. So that is our fundamental issue.
There's the other side of intermittency, which is when there's too much wind or too much. Wind is the big one, really.
Yeah.
Which we've talked about before a little bit. And that's when the government has to, or not the government, we, the energy payers, we have to pay for private wind farms to be paid not to produce too much energy, otherwise it will overload the grid. And the amount that we're paying them for that is going up and up. I think it was up like 10 or 20% last year from the previous year. It's going up a lot. It was 124 million last year we paid wind farms.
That'll make people happy. That might get a few comments.
Yeah, 124 million. And the other thing about that might even delight people more is that if you're a private, if you're a private guy looking to invest in a wind farm, you might have a vested interest in picking somewhere that is going to overload the grid, and that basically you're incentivized to get those payments because they are more than what you would earn normally.
From when it's spinning.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Let's not anger people.
It's a devious way anyway,
Let's not anger people.
to find a site, but yeah, it exists, doesn't it?
Okay, right. Well, so we're moving on from intermittency.
So yeah, and this is one that kind of it bamboozled me up to a point. So on the costing side of it. So the term that kind of bamboozled me is the levelizing cost of energy. If we were to use an acronym. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard you pushing that one in the office, and I'm not convinced by it.
It's not as good as a seg. That was the
real
one
highlight.
that could.
We should work in government, just make up acronyms.
Yeah. So basically, it's really difficult to take all the different energy generation fuels and modes. So whether that's wind or hydro or coal, etc., and find an effective way of how to price them over time.
Right.
So saying one thing is sort of cheaper today might not take into account that you're going to massively expand economies of scale tomorrow, or there's going to be a kind of a big bang in terms of that technological development of that energy source. So it might look really expensive today, but could actually be cheaper tomorrow.
So they use this LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, to sort of give an even playing field, and it shows you which is cheaper and which is more expensive. How is it calculated?
But it's extremely, it's a kind of algorithmic model with lots of different assumptions and models.
It's relatively basic, though.
It is relatively basic.
But the assumptions going into...
Yeah, it's we have a blog on it which kind of breaks down how it actually works, because it's kind of a scary equation when you look at it.
But the simple one is cost to operate and build divided by the lifetime electricity or energy output.
Essentially,
so
they put in a few other variables, but also the more variables you put in, the more assumptions you're making, the more you're crossing your fingers and hoping.
Yeah, but it gives a kind of feel.
Yeah, essentially. We actually had an interesting kind of debate today about the levelized cost of energy and whether how much it would differ between countries.
Well, because we were going to use some data, right? The reason behind this is we were going to throw people some numbers, and the last time the government did this in the UK was 2015. 2016. And I think the energy landscape has changed considerably since then. We were going to go to the US, but as you were talking about, the topography.
The topography is different. It also, the levelized cost of energy takes into account labour costs and things like that. So comparing between countries is very difficult, I think, with LCOE.
And just the climate varies so massively, because the output of solar PV in California is completely different here. Although, whether it's similar to that.
So they'll make that point about that if you scale up, normally costs go down. It's not the same what happened to Germany a few years ago. So there was a massive push to get rid of nuclear or decommission them as quickly as possible, and then move over to renewable energy sources. But what they found was it was quite a massive impact onto grid load and obviously predictability, as you talked about. So actually their energy costs went up, or their LCOE for those would have gone up.
But the renewables, even if they have come down over time, and solar panels is a really good example of that, the subsidies that they have carried and do carry now, I know there are subsidies for kind of the more traditional energy forms, but those subsidies are pushing the energy price up for the renewables, right? And I don't feel that that's quite picked up.
Yeah, I mean, another example of somewhere that invested heavily and that had an unexpected cost reaction was in California, which kind of has its own almost localized economy when it comes to these things. Right. So there, between 2011 and 2017, the cost of their solar panels came down 75%. To buy, which is like crazy. That's insane. But at the same time, their electricity prices rose 5 times more than they did in the rest of the US.
But is that because of massively subsidised energy forms?
Well,
I know it's lots of things.
Yeah.
But I'd say
it's certainly something that needs to be taken into account, because these things do cost a lot to install.
California really struggles. So the main thing is because of water. So a lot of droughts. A lot of population, so basically they rely on the rest of America, to the rest of the US states to get all of their resources there efficiently. A lot of blackouts, so a lot of underinvestment in their grid, despite the fact that it's a view, but it's seemingly, you get kind of the positive spin on California, but actually, it's been kind of decades of underinvestment.
And I think but just on this, so the cost of renewables we feel is kind of coming down.
In general, yes.
In general, and I talk about subsidies, but the Hinkley Point C, that is the most ridiculous subsidy being paid, and no spade has even been put in the ground.
Yeah.
But they're being guaranteed this enormous strike rate, which is so far above and beyond what the other energy forms are being subsidised at. It makes renewables look quite nice, to be honest.
One of the reasons that the Swansea Tidal Lagoon was rejected is because they were promised a similar strike price to Hinkley Point C. People didn't like it.
Yeah.
But it's the wrong type of nuclear. It's kind of investing in a legacy nuclear technology as opposed to putting money into more development and moving on to more efficient forms of nuclear. But anyway, that's for another episode. But so that's kind of cost as the negative side.
Okay, so the next one we're going to do is space.
Yes,
right. So not space above us, but just land area. Essentially, that's all we're talking about here.
I shared with you guys a few days ago. So I was coming back from holiday.
I didn't think this was real. I thought this was like an 80s diff that you found on a computer.
I was zooming in, from the...
Yeah, no, I understand that now. I had to be told what it was.
So flying over the channel, and so I took a couple of short clips of the lots of wind farms. So
was it also because he sent it to us at like 10 o'clock at night?
That may have been that.
5 p.m.
But go on then. So
on a Monday. No, it's just so if you can imagine, I mean, that was obviously from 20,000 feet up in the air. That was a lot of space. So these wind farms, so they're kind of on the coast of East Anglia.
Yeah,
they take up a lot of space. Obviously, you can see them. When you fly over, from the continent to the UK. So, but obviously, most of the time you wouldn't see the offshore ones, so they're less kind of intrusive. However, imagine then your onshore farms. They'll be taking a lot of space, and that's the problem. So in terms of not just intermittency, but in terms of the output that they can generate, you need a massive land mass.
But so the argument for renewables is they are getting more and more efficient, right? So wind turbines are getting bigger, as in I know you're going to have them close, but they're getting bigger. They're producing more power,
which is a big thing because it's exponential.
Yes, exactly. Solar panels are getting more efficient. The panels themselves are getting more efficient. We've got things like microinverters that are increasing efficiency. The issue is that even though that is the case, you still need vast swathes of land to be able to put these things in place.
So, we quote the scientist quite, so David Mackay. So he did a simplistic calculation, and he thought that basically you'd need about, if you were to run everything on renewables, you would cover the UK up to 25%.
Yeah.
Just to kind of satisfy all the basic needs, and that's
quite a lot.
It's quite a lot.
And also, it doesn't just have to be land; it has to be suitable land. And for each different technology, that's different. So, like hydro, we make about less than 2% of our energy from that, which is still fair enough. But if we were to use every other hydro opportunity in the whole of the UK, then the maximum we could get is 2% more.
But there are other things as well. So, and it's actually linked to intermittency. But if I cover 25% of UK land mass in wind turbines, or vice versa with solar panels, and the sun doesn't shine, it doesn't matter. I've got this massive area, but I'm not producing any power.
The other one that takes a huge amount of space is bioenergy, but that one can be much more easy to dispatch. So it's not got such a problem with intermittency, but it takes a huge amount of space and also has various other.
And you've got to transport it as well. So
you've got to get the biomass where it needs to be.
How are you getting the fuel, from one side to the other? So it's. I think although what you've said, the efficiency is going up, it still has a long way to go for us to maximise the space that it uses to generate that. So.
Okay, so the argument is they're getting more and more efficient, but the issue is it doesn't really matter. Yeah. It's still, compared to a nuclear power plant, you've got to put a lot more in.
So I don't think it's necessarily linear to efficiency.
But the one that's always annoyed me is the River Severn and the tidal, the
Lagoon.
tidal barrier they want to put in.
Yeah.
Oh, they talked about putting in
Yeah.
because that to me is predictable for like 180 years, the tides, or probably
140
longer than that.
years.
I'm going to be told they're predictable forever, but you're producing loads of energy. You know when the time is. If you couple it with energy storage, you'd be absolutely laughing. And that apparently could produce 5% of the UK's energy requirements. Which I know you're talking about tidal with hydro. It doesn't do enough, but tidal, we could become world leaders in it.
I mean, we keep having the opportunity. Have you seen what they've? I know I always talk about the Swansea Tidal Lagoon. It's because I'm Welsh, but
I didn't know you were.
barely mention it. But they've redesigned the project because it wasn't getting supported or funded, blah, blah, blah. They've redesigned it, and I don't know if you guys have seen it. I'll put a link to it on the video because it's very cool, but they've redesigned it to basically be a floating island that looks like a Welsh dragon. And it's awesome.
I like that. Right,
So what's
okay. Next one. So we have the opinion of people from the renewable or looking at renewables is the renewables don't have the environmental impact of fossil fuels, which, it kind of makes sense. If I'm producing solar PV, I've got my solar panels already installed and they're producing electricity, I'm not burning anything, so I'm not producing any carbon dioxide, so that's a good thing. So on the face of it, renewables are good in terms of their environmental impact.
However, I know you sort of briefed us, Harry, on the toxins and things like that on the solar panels themselves. I still think they do have they're really hard to recycle.
They are. They're improving the panels so that you need less and less of these toxic heavy metals. However, you still do need them. The EU
Like
is
mercury.
Yeah, exactly, stuff like that. The EU is the only place in the world which has sanctions on how you're supposed to dispose of it. Although what I will say about that is that I spent an extremely long time trying to research exactly what those sanctions are, and they're very hard to find.
So what happens? So I think it's one of those where we kick into touch for another 20 years, which is kind of the lifespan. So we'll still worry about it in 20 years' time.
Yeah, which is pretty standard. It's what we do. But I think the other one that's going to become a bigger thing here is the battery technology, because it's lithium, tends to be. I know that batteries will probably evolve over the next how many years, but that's rare earth metal, as far as I understand, and you can only mine it in certain places. And, there are issues with that, because we are reliant, number one, and I think most of it, and I may be incorrect here, but it's in China. And I think they have a bit of a monopoly on it.
Inner Mongolia, I think, is where they do most of the mining of rare metals.
So not China. Inner Mongolia.
I believe that's true.
Anyway, but that becomes an issue because we are now reliant on a very rare, hence rare earth metals, element to provide the sort of solutions we're looking at in the future.
So that's sort of toxins argument. And then going back to what the previous point we were talking about. So if you're having to site a big solar farm, so again, very visible. So when you're flying over, you can actually see massive swathes of solar farmland. What happens to all of the wild animals and things like that?
Well, they normally, so if it's a solar farm, they can have animals beneath them. I think that's a thing. I think as well, so wind turbines, people get all upset because wind turbines look horrible, right?
I think they look nice.
See, this is it. But you, and younger people, I think, different generation, we're used to it. Oh, all right. Not that much younger
you
than
put
me.
us in the same generation, that's fine.
But I feel like older people didn't have them growing up. They weren't used to them. If you saw them when you were 10 or from 5 and they just were normal life, then you don't have an issue with them.
Yeah, it's because, but also in science classes and things like that, they tell you about how cool things.
But if you're 65 and all you read about is people putting in a wind turbine and they're only putting it in so it doesn't produce power, but they just get paid for turning it off, that's not what you want to hear. And so these are real issues that we're facing.
You also get a lot of horror stories about them killing birds and bats. And
Bats.
Yes.
I heard something on the radio this morning, so I was listening to LBC. Because of all the political movements, I thought it would be interesting. And it was, actually. But there was this fellow who came on talking about wind turbines. And he was saying that the bats, the pressure changes around the wind turbines, so the bats' heads explode, was literally his words. Now, I don't think that's actually... He then said, oh no, I think they just hemorrhage and then they die.
Jesus.
But still, I know, I was like, wow, this is quite interesting over my sort of early morning.
Well, and also,
journey.
so where people have problems with, say, wind turbines, is reports we've heard that in terms of bird populations, so responsible for flying.
But then you hear the counter arguments to that they don't really do anything in terms of birds.
There's a lot of interesting counter arguments with the bird thing, because people will quote you numbers of birds and then say, oh well, house cats kill 20 million times that or whatever, but then you need to think about where the wind turbines are, where the bird populations are, and which birds are getting hit. Is it the rare ones, or is it like Mrs. Pigeon from London Station?
When I was talking about that the Seven Estuary thing, and talking about putting this tidal barrier in, one of the biggest arguments against that is that you completely change the ecosystem around there. And so all these birds that are feeding around that area suddenly wouldn't be able to.
I had a call from a woman who, when we were running some stories about the tidal lagoon, she was from Cornwall. She was very concerned because the plans for the lagoon required a whole lot of rock, basically, that they were going to mine out of Cornwall, and there are a lot of environmental concerns around that. I think there's a whole group campaigning against it.
Okay.
On that basis, so there's various different things that you maybe wouldn't think of straight away that are environmental factors.
But look, open pit mining is not always a bad idea, because sometimes when the mine has been exhausted of its materials, what they normally do is they fill it up and turn it into an aqua park, which then incentivizes wildlife back. So you've got quite a lot of those.
I can't remember the specifics of the argument, but I remember that she was very passionate.
No, I think people are, because they don't want any of this stuff happening where they live.
Well, look,
I'm happy with fracking as long as it's not in my area.
Crossrail 1, so they dug up so much earth by with the tunnelling that then they had to dispose of the earth and the rocks and everything somewhere else. So they deposited it out in the Thames estuary, which then created a bird and wildlife sanctuary out of it. So it's not
That's
always
awesome.
bad things to mining rock and infrastructure projects.
Except the environmental cost of actually doing it.
Yes.
But the other thing is, if we don't...
I think it's more of a heritage.
No, I agree. Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree.
But I mean, if we don't do the renewable stuff, then what's the environmental impact of continuing to use fossil fuels?
Quite.
So, I mean, that environmental impact is crazy. And also extremely costly, if you want to go back to that point.
Yeah. No,
Philip Hammond said that if we were going to hit the target of, being zero emissions by 2050, it's going to cost us £1 trillion.
But that £1 trillion is that companies that are helping to do that are then paying through taxes. So
it's some of the UK over £1 trillion. So.
Yeah, but it depends if that is just genuinely a cost or that is generating other industries.
Is that what he said?
He said the cost of fighting climate change and to get us to the 2050
is going to cost that.
Yeah.
But that means you're building more wind turbines.
Yeah.
So you need people that build the wind turbines. I have no doubt. And I think one of the bigger issues, and I don't actually know too much about it, but is, with carbon costs and all this sort of thing, you're trying to basically artificially generate a market. And I think as soon as you start tinkering like that and natural things can't play out, you get issues. And it's things like the carbon price going through the ceiling as we get later and later because we have to hit a target by 2050. So it will be interesting to see how that one plays out. Right, go on, last one. Climate.
So climate. So obviously, so the point about the obvious argument about renewable energy sources is that it doesn't put more carbon back into the atmosphere, which then creates what kind of the majority of the scientific community have said is acceleration of climate change, where the Earth is getting warmer and warmer. So obviously the positive side of renewables is as such, but since we're talking about problems of renewable energy, still for technology like solar PV, you've still got to mine rare earth metals.
Yeah.
So how's that? So that's kind of an anti.
So basically,
cost.
as soon as you think renewables, you think clean energy, right? But for me to shove a wind turbine up means I've got to put steel, I've got to put concrete as a massive foundation, because I imagine otherwise they just fall over. So we've got some numbers here. So a 2 megawatt wind turbine weighs 250 tons, right? Including tower, rotor, blades, etc., etc. That is, it's just nuts. That is a huge amount of resource to make that wind turbine.
And concrete and creation of concrete is a heavy duty, very energy intensive production.
We wrote a blog on that a long time ago.
Yes, you did. It took us about 4 years to publish it, because I always made sniding comments about that. But anyway, I think it was worth to mention. But also, Harry, what you said, very, very good point about so carbon neutral sources like biofuels. The cost of transportation from the source to where you are combusting it, to create the electricity, etc., is is still kind of considered as a big impact on the environment. Also, pellets. So do you cut down more trees just to make it into recycled pellets?
Yeah.
So kind of a flip side. However, once these energy sources are in situ, they are actually creating.
Although we don't know how to recycle them, and we don't know how long they last.
Yes, because we.
Yeah, because these are new.
Touch. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So these are new technologies. I'm just sitting on the fence here, as you've probably noticed with most of this.
It is, and you are answering the academic question of this blog title today. So it's important to mention that.
But I think one of the other big things is, when you're talking about renewables, it provides the alternative to fossil fuels. But again, tie that back into your intermittency thing, that's all good and well. But if I want to boil the kettle at the halftime of, Football World Cup, and it's dark and it's not windy, my renewables aren't doing anything. So actually I still have to have the fossil fuels in place. And I think until battery storage becomes more developed, and we are now seeing the technologies begin to emerge, but it is certainly a very fledgling sort of industry. We are, we're a long way from that.
And we're mostly reliant on gas. And actually, I mean, it's. I was saying to you guys earlier, it's an interesting time to be having this discussion. Because at the moment, so just under half of our gas, 44%, is made in the UK by ourselves. That's a statistic from 2017, but it's similar for last year, I think. 47% of it comes from Europe, mostly Norway and Russia. So we get that in through pipes under the sea. Now,
And on occasionally on boats.
Actually, that's a different 9%. Actually, that's the liquefied natural gas. That's a separate thing. But we also buy that in. So in buying in the gas that we need to support the renewables industry, then we're reliant on Europe, and we're also in a difficult position now with today Boris Johnson just heading into number 10, and his kind of no deal, looking like hard Brexit stance. There's very possible that it's going to have huge knock-on effects for what it costs to run our energy, because we're going to have to pay potentially a lot more.
The good news is the ships are running pretty freely from the Middle East over to here.
Yeah.
So
wink, wink.
That shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very interesting times.
It is, yeah. And just come back to what you said, Harry. So where we had Greg Clark, who was in charge of BEIS, so that's the Department for Energy, Infrastructure and Business in no particular order, replaced by Andrew Leadsom, who's now the full-time secretary. So yeah, we've just got to see, what type of stance her department takes, because Greg Clark was quite pro, dealing with the effects of climate change and pushing kind of.
But I still think, you remember when we started all this, and there was Department of Energy and Climate Change, right? So DEC existed, and so there was real focus on our energy future, and I feel that got really watered down when that got changed into BEIS.
I think the Committee for Climate Change, you see them more and more popping up, especially with all this Extinction Rebellion. I bet they're hiring quite a few new people the last few years.
Yeah, that's true.
They're generally, they take a quite a proactive stance, I'd say. But whether the government listens to their policy suggestions is another thing. But they're generally there to kind of look at the views of the scientific community, write, sit in committees and, write kind of long recommendation reports, etc. And, come up with a list the government should prioritise, but, whether governments do that or not is...
Do you guys know what you would say if you'd been put in charge of UK Energy and you could say in one sentence what Boris Johnson should do now?
Yes.
Go on then.
What would I say? What would I do?
Yeah.
I'd get our baseload sorted. So instead of farting about, we'd have more baseload power that is cleaner nuclear. You have to go nuclear. You're going to say no, but you have to go nuclear.
No, I'm chuffed that you said that.
Yeah. So I'd go nuclear. Not the way of France. I wouldn't go, build so much nuclear. I've got electricity coming out my backside. But I would. I'd put a strong baseload of nuclear in. I would become less reliant on gas because, as you've said, that is coming from other countries on the whole. We may as well just give up fracking now. I think the government, they put such a... I think the fracking companies were so desperate to start fracking, they signed up to anything the government allowed them to do. And the kind of the damage levels that they could sort of work under without being told to stop were so low that they were all like, yes, because we get a fracking license. And then they've started doing it, and they're like, actually, we can't even turn on a drill or whatever they're using because it hits the reading, it hits the level where they have to stop working. So fracking, unless the government soften their stance on it, isn't going to happen. It's also...
But that's not the way forward. It's
I don't think it is.
It's hydrocarbon. Yeah.
No, exactly. I don't think it is. But I think, so if you have nuclear and then it's supported by renewables and battery or an energy storage technique, then that would be what I would do. I appreciate it's not that flexible. So your baseload has to all be nuclear. Sorry, this was one sentence you wanted.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Fine, good.
But also,
I'll leave it at that.
I think the issue with nuclear has been that pretty much in terms of kind of the... I think after the 60s or what have you, just because of the perception of nuclear, I don't think much investment and research has happened publicly, because once we kind of got our nuclear arsenal, etc., and our few nuclear power stations, that was it really. Nothing happened for half a decade. So rather than spending money on carbon capture and storage, which is going to combust coal and gas, as you said, which is again we're depleting the resources. For me, that kind of research should be spent on developing more efficient forms of nuclear power.
But also putting them in place, right?
Yeah. Because
we're going to see a serious step change in our generating capacity when all these nuclear power plants go offline. The ones that you were talking about that were built in the 70s and 80s, they are reaching the end of their useful life, like now.
I'm sure, if we invested and set up kind of industry-wide competitions on how can we more effectively deal with nuclear waste in a more cheaper and effective and less environmentally hindering way, we could find out solutions. But I think we've taken such a step back and not looked at it for decades and decades that I think that there's a massive knowledge gap which we could develop.
And I've said this for actually since we've started. The government in charge when the lights go off, as in when you start having rolling
Serious
blackouts, like you currently have in South Africa, and I know that's under mismanagement, but literally they just turn all the electricity off in a region. They announce it's going to happen, they turn the electricity off because they don't have enough. Whoever that happens to, I mean, they will never be in power again, because it's the one kind of thing, that when you turn a light switch on, the light comes on. And if that weren't the case, it's going to be pretty interesting times. That does that kind of cover it? Are you happy that we've talked about some of the...
I think we kind of covered news within all the little mini sections, so we'll try to keep it relevant. And I think that sort of explains. I'm sure we'll be covering.
Can I tell you one? I've got one other piece of personal news.
Go on.
I changed my energy tariff yesterday. Went onto Uswitch, changed it.
The cheapest?
No. So I'll tell you what I did. I went to British Gas, which wasn't the cheapest.
Yeah.
However, I've decided now is the time to get a smart meter
Yeah.
So I went to the biggest energy supplier in the hope that they can provide me with a smart meter for electricity and gas in the coming months once I switch over.
Very good.
That's pretty boring personal news, huh?
No, we'll follow up on that story as it develops.
Yes, yes, we will. Anyway, that's it from me. I'm done.
Yeah, well.
So that's it for another week.
Yeah. See you next week.
See you next week.